morning, all. And I want, first of all, to say how grateful I am to Maurice Tomlinson and the Canadian HIV Legal Network for their creative marshalling of the forces that could bring us together this morning. It being Thanksgiving Day in the United States of America, where most and a lot of our Caribbean diaspora and diaspora from the developing world reside. But I want to let you know that this intervention has been structured around my 21 years of active involvement in relevant policies and programs at both regional and international levels, engaging with parliamentarians, faith leaders, youth leaders, representatives from the private sector, academia, civil society, the LGBTQ community, and those living with and affected by HIV. Although my associations with these groups individually and at times collectively have taught me that to make an impact on human development and change, one has to be proximate. And by proximate, I mean grounding with so as to better understand and champion the plight of the marginalized, the most effective, the neediest. As a result, I can tell you that whether defending access to affordable medicines as a human right or empowering women and girls or supporting the inclusion of comprehensive sexual education in schools or human rights for lesbian, gays, bisexual, and transgender people, whatever the cause. The goal must be to leave not one individual behind. And so I will attempt to establish, from my experience, a broad template for overcoming challenges to achieve inclusiveness, equal rights, and social justice for all. I'm glad to note that some of my colleagues in faith from the Caribbean and even from Southeast Asia are engaged in this dialogue and will speak to specific inflection points within those areas for promoting a shared vision and equality. I'm particularly grateful for the experience through my involvement in the Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV/AIDS Justice for All movement with Derek Springer, its director, and Kenneth Garth-Minot, who you heard yesterday, chair of the Caribbean Faith Leaders Steering Committee. It is encouraging to note that faith leaders have fully endorsed the 5 principles of the PANCAP Justice for All, which also became a prominent template for action among other stakeholders, including parliamentarians and civil society leaders at community and national regional levels. Slide 1, please. You will note in the slide that these disparities are really very important, but in fact, particularly with reference to the first and overarching principle of justice for all, it embraces the impulses of Christianity: contrition, gratitude, and love. These impulses are best expressed in Matthew chapter 25, verses 3 to 10, and it reflects the kingdom of mercy, where strangers are welcome. And in fact, more so, it also deals with love as a driving force. The principles of justice for all also, as you will see in the slide, it illustrates how the AIDS movement brought to the fore stigma and discrimination and the need to care for the marginalized. HIV also exposed, in fact, the full lines in society, I would say the fault lines in society, and taught us that in order to protect society as a whole, we have to protect everybody. The coronavirus sparks a similar realization. But in fact, if we deal with the current ecosystem, it has made it clearer that struggles to eliminate discrimination against LGBTQ communities is an essential precondition to ending AIDS, HIV, and it is comparable to the conflagration of Black Lives Matter against institutional racism across the global social consciousness, and indeed, again, those confronting the devastating effects of the coronavirus. In search of solutions, we look at slide 2. In search of solution, we really turn to science and empirical research for guidance to our policies, and most relevant to this gathering, to underscore and undergird our prayers and supplication. What we learn is that that LGBTQ encompasses all races and ethnic groups and religions and social classes. It also encompasses a range of social and economic disparities linked to stigma and discrimination. In fact, the UNAIDS report tells us that 65 countries criminalize same-sex relations, 8 or 9 impose the death penalty. We're also seeing from the information the denial of civil and human rights for LGBTQ being pervasive, and that discrimination against LGBTQ persons are associated, discriminations are associated with high rates of psychiatric disorders, substance abuse, and suicide. But more important, we see the experiences of violence and victimization. And we also see personal and family social experiences related to sexual orientation and gender identity, leaving mental health and personal safety to be attended to. Can we have the next slide, please? More specifically, we learn about the social determinants affecting the health of LGBTQ individuals. Legal discrimination. Gay men are 28 more times likely to contract HIV/AIDS, for example, than the general population. Transgender people that account for an estimated 0.1 to 1.1% of the global population are 13 times more likely to contract HIV/AIDS. Lack of laws to protect bullying in schools. Lack of social programs targeted to and appropriate for LGBTQ youth, adults, and elders. And then the shortage of healthcare providers, knowledgeable and culturally competent in LGBTQ health. Next slide, please. But what is important is that the global and social disparities leave LGBTQ youth 2 or 3 times more likely to commit suicide and more likely to be homeless. That lesbians are less likely to get preventive services for NCDs and cancers, that gay men are at higher risk of HIV and other STDs. And in the US, especially, this is among communities of color. Lesbian and bisexual females are likely to be overweight and obese because of lack of access to preventive care. And transgender individuals have a high prevalence for HIV, STDs, victimization, mental health issues, etc. And elderly LGBT individuals face additional barriers because of isolation and a lack of social services and cultural competent providers. And finally, the cycle tells us that LGBT populations have the highest rates of tobacco and alcohol and drugs. Now, these disparities really are interconnected. These disparities are really interconnected. And what, in fact, we see is that there is a long and storied tradition of advocacy for human rights and social justice through scholarship, research, and activism. How then are faith leaders handling these challenges? Intimate Conviction Conference 1 in 2017, sponsored by the Canadian HIV Legal Network, examined the church and sodomy laws across the Commonwealth, and has assisted in the construct of the intellectual infrastructure of what I would call high-quality conversations with faith leaders. In the Caribbean, PANCAP, in collaboration with the Caribbean Faith Leaders Network, they have in fact developed a very important set of conversations between faith leaders and LGBTQ, as we heard in a presentation yesterday, and as we will no doubt hear in some of the presentations to follow. So let me state the major lessons learned while I was engaged in the PANCAP Justice for All program and the consultations that we had with faith leaders. In fact, in those consultations, it was very important that we did not see the church leaders as a homogeneous group. It helped us to understand the distinction between the church as an institution and the church as an organism. As an institution, the church is a formal organization like government and schools with a purpose, plan, structure, officers, and mission. In the case of church work and church workers, social problems and policy proposals are addressed through synods and denominational boards. As an organism, the church is a body or communion of believers, not a unified organization, but an aggregate of individual believers. In addition, there are differences between religious and theological orientations in much the same way as one would classify varying political and academic strands as progressives, moderates, conservatives, and of course, there is the non-religious ranging from agnostic to atheist. But in whichever part of the spectrum one is located, Christians individually or collectively, or in their institutional or organic roles, are called upon to be responsible, passionate, and law-abiding. Church and kingdom work, therefore, can benefit from the empirical evidence of studies and reports that focus on tensions that exist in the global struggle for reducing inequalities and increasing inclusiveness of the LGBTQ community. These are highlighted, among others, in the report from the UN expert group in October 2019 under the title Protection Against Violence and Discrimination Based on Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and also from the PANCAP 2017 report on human rights, social justice in the Caribbean, with a focus on the communities. Recommendations from these reports in which LGBTQ are involved provide the pillars for advocacy. Yet, in the Caribbean, the PANCAP model anti-discrimination legislation endorsed by the CARICOM Attorneys Generals in 2012 is still to be implemented at the national level, despite parliamentary sensitization forums convened by PANCAP over the last 3 years. Notwithstanding widespread commitment of the PANCAP stakeholders of faith leaders, parliamentarians, civil society, youth to the Justice for All roadmap, there is resistance to approve the elements that call for eliminating the laws that discriminate against LGBTQ. While the unprecedented Caribbean faith leaders' declaration to end the AIDS epidemic by 2030 has been adopted in principle, several elements of the institutional church have either retracted from their commitments or have led demonstrations against decisions of the court in Belize and Trinidad and Tobago to abolish discriminatory laws against same-sex relations. So what are outstanding questions, and how do we achieve positive global interventions? For me, what is so difficult about understanding that discriminatory laws and social cultural norms continue to marginalize and exclude lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse persons from education, from healthcare, housing, employment, and occupation and other sectors? Why is there resistance in recognizing that access to economic, social, and cultural rights is hampered by discriminatory laws and have negative impacts on individuals, their families, groups, and communities? The evidence illustrates how these discriminatory social norms result in poverty and exclusion, lower social economic status, and limited access to assets that are essential to employment in full range of human rights among them. Among them, in slide 5, please, you will note that studies have been done by UNESCO, by the World Bank, by UNDP, and also by UNAIDS, which illustrates that states have moral and legal obligations under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And also an ILO study that has shown that trade unions and employers' organizations have been working to promote meaningful inclusion of LGBTQ at the workplace. What these developments have indicated is that there are some positive trends happening at the global level. So, but why abolition of sodomy laws matters? Where are we positioned in the arc of social justice? Well, homosexuality is part of the human experience. It is not relegated to one race or ethnicity. It is perhaps the strongest obstacle to embracing full equality for LGBT brothers and sisters. Originally, sodomy laws were part of a larger body of law derived from church law, designed to prevent non-procreative sexual and sexuality anywhere, and any sexuality outside of marriage. As the gay rights movement began to make headway, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, and the social condemnation of being gay began to weaken, social conservatives increasingly invoke sodomy laws as a justification for discrimination. To date, UNAIDS, as I indicated in the previous research, reveals that more than 65 countries criminalize same-sex relations, including 9 that impose the death penalty. But nowhere did unmasking the ambiguity to social justice materialize than earlier this year during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the US with its worldwide ripple effect. Here was acknowledged that all human beings deserve to be treated fairly, to have equal protection under the law, to have corresponding access to all services and conveniences, benefits, protections, and even responsibilities that go along with living in a civil society. Denial of these rights, especially as it relates to sexuality in general and homosexuality, derives from a very conservative interpretation of Bible teaching. Yet, there is nothing even conservative evangelical theory which would say that homosexuality should be criminalized while adultery and fornication are not. In the Old Testament, they are all capital offenses, like the breaking of the Sabbath. The reality is that in our families, our jobs, in our schools and neighborhoods, and of course, in our churches, LGBTQ people are all around us. We have adopted a sort of don't ask, don't tell policy instead of allowing our LGBTQ brothers and sisters to affirm who they are and support them. It is puzzling that some who speak about and speak out so strongly for racial justice or climate justice cannot speak as strongly about LGBTQ justice. Very often our appeal for LGBTQ justice is met with the refrain, but the Bible says. Such a refrain can be understood in the context of differences in theological positions, but it becomes repulsive as a shield for animosity, venom, and hatred. Mother Teresa reminds us that love cannot be demanded. It could only be responded to. And I quote, "You love God as much as the person you love least." And so I want to turn to the words of Dr. William Barber in slide 6. He indicates Dr. Barber, Reverend Barber, is the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And he puts it starkly: "I can tell you how many times I've been sentenced to hell, not by God, but by human beings who want to come and beat me up with the Bible. I know the Bible just as well as the folks who come to me, but they seem to act like I have never read it. I have read it. There are many themes in the Bible, but to me, the underlying theme is justice, love, equality, freedom, and compassion. When we look to Jesus as our model, that is what we get." And then when we turn to some of the luminaries in our faith, we see glimmers of hope. Pope Francis calls for same-sex couples to be covered by civil union laws. Presiding USA Anglican Bishop Michael Curry, in his recent book, Love is the Way, Holding to Hope in Troubled Times, he redefines love not as a sentiment, but as a commitment to human dignity and social justice. And then Catholic Bishop of Trinidad and Tobago, Jason Gordon, and Anglican Archbishop of the West Indies, Howard Gregory of Jamaica, who succeeded the 2017 Intimate Conviction keynote speaker at the event, John Holder. They have added their voice to support legislation abolishing the criminalization of the sodomy laws. Now in Barbados, it is poised to become the first Caribbean community member state to recognize same-sex unions. Governor General Dame Sandra Mason announced the news at the opening of the country's new parliamentary session in September, saying the time has come to end discrimination in all forms. But it remains to be seen how public opinion will go on this issue once the proposed referendum takes place, with the expectation that several religious bodies will speak out against it. The decision of the national referendum in Barbados may yet help to reveal the disposition of the church as an organism, not only in Barbados, but elsewhere in the Caribbean and the world. So let us end by reflecting on the future. Throughout my journey in advocating for social justice, I have interacted with colleagues of the faith who are okay with welcoming LGBTQI persons as long as we could say we are loving the sinner, but hating the sin. This has been problematic for me because of my belief that it denies the essential and authentic personhood of LGBTQ individuals. It is clear to me that our discussions at this second iteration of intimate conviction are capturing a moment when the needle has begun to shift slowly towards LGBTQ justice. Maybe the transformation will occur more rapidly through litigation, and in fact, we will necessarily have to deal with that conflict between church and state that may yet occur. But for sure, the church as an organism is being propelled by the elements of the church as an institution. And indeed, Bishop Jason Gordon, in a homily last Sunday on the Feast of Christ the King, hails Christianity as an event that is moving the world to another stage of development through the kingdom of love and peace. I commend that homily to you. Hence, we begin or we end where we began. That is, recognizing that religious witnesses have been essential to the success of movements for justice throughout the world. While religion has always shown its progressive and conservative sides and has sometimes been an uneasy combination of two of them, faith communities have been able, at critical movement and critical moments in time, to convert their prophetic power into what Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 referred to as the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood and sisterhood. He believed we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Master of ceremonies, colleagues, faith leaders, let this consultation truly roll out the stone of hope. I thank you very much for your attention.
Vice Chancellor, thank you. It was so rounded, so complete, so warm. You mentioned Mother Teresa. My thoughts while you were speaking went even bigger. I saw Mother Mary in all that you've been doing and all that you've been saying. You mentioned mercy at one point, and I was very glad that you did. So many people think mercy means, don't hit me. It means love and compassion, as Pope Francis made abundantly clear in the year of mercy, in which Jesus comes to us and enables us to say, Jesus, I trust in you. I trust in your love. your everlasting love. Yes, so many LGBTQ people have suffered the gravest wrong by the use of religion, as you've said. It's a terrible thing. The Christian right say that this means there's something wrong with them, that they're damaged goods. No, they have been damaged by the people who've ostracized them and made them feel less than they are. Yeah. These people who use biblical texts for one purpose but ignore them for the rest, as you pointed out. The death penalty doesn't stop with gayness. You mentioned international agreements, and that's one of the most troubling things, I think, that we have, certainly here in Barbados. Because if other states, sensitive to what the law requires, attempts to press it upon governments, the usual line is, you're blackmailing us, which of course shows a total misunderstanding of what international norms are. The problem with international norms is that there is no obvious way of enforcing them, which is why Hitler got away with what he got away with. So yes, I mean, there was a writer here in the press, I mentioned some of the letters yesterday, who wrote and said, oh, I don't care what the international community says, I don't agree with them. As if what he agreed with mattered one jot when it came to the world of international relations. But that's how some people think of them. So yes, I was very grateful for all of that. And in particular, the idea that you presented that really there's no turning back of the tide. The Christian right may think they're canutes, but they're not. The world is changing. And the question is how we are going to change with it. One thing about the position here, as I understand it, same-sex civil partnerships will not be put to a referendum. It's the same-sex marriage proposal that will be put to the referendum. Writers have already, as I pointed out yesterday, been very busy in the press denigrating the proposal and coming out with all the usual arguments, which is really rather sad. So thank you very much for that. It was the most beautiful presentation, and thank you and bless you for it. Well, we move on now, and you'll be here for the question and answer session. We move on now to our panel. This panel, the first of the morning, is from the Bahamas and the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. Our first speaker is Natino Thompson, who my description says he's a Bahamian writer, pioneer, artist, and activist. So Natino, go for it.